Welcome to the Organized Crime News Weekly Podcast. This is Kiva Dottie, and we're back to another week of covering the crazy events going on in organized crime throughout the world this week. First story we have this week is in France. Felix Bengui, nicknamed the Cat, head of the Yoda gang of Marseille, was extradited from Morocco to France. He has been charged with importing drugs, money laundering, and non-declaration of resources, which basically means being in the possession of the proceeds of crime. A little bit of background on Bengui. He was arrested in Casablanca last March. The gang that he was the leader of, the Yoda gang, was a very prominent gang in the city of Marseille, France, that fought a war with the DZ Mafia, which is now the most dominant drug gang in all of Marseille and some say France as well. This war started in February 2023 after an incident in a nightclub in Phuket, Thailand, of all places. And the incident that kicked off this feud was apparently when Bengui tipped a bowl of ice over the leader of the DZ Mafia, which is pretty silly, but some of the ways these feuds start are pretty silly in general. But no matter how silly the beginnings of this feud were, it led to 35 murders alone in 2023. The Yoda gang ended up losing that feud, and they are currently in a rapid decline. DZ Mafia has taken over much of the drug sales points in Marseille, France, and they have been in the news quite a lot lately in France regarding violence, and the government has spoken out against them, and they're recruiting teenagers over apps to carry out murders. So Bengui is obviously in a very weakened position. His gang has been decimated, and he is currently in custody on very serious charges. And the DZ Mafia continues to reign over the Marseille underworld. For our next story, we are going to Brazil, where it was discovered that ammunition used in the murder of former real estate agent and cryptocurrency expert Antonio Vinicius Gritzbach belonged to the Sao Paulo military police. A little bit of background on Gritzbach. He also, as well as being a former real estate agent and cryptocurrency expert, helped the PCC launder their money. PCC stands for Primeiro Comando de Capital. In English, it would be the First Capital Command. They are one of the most powerful drug trafficking organizations, not just in Brazil and South America, but in the world. They have been responsible for a good chunk of the cocaine moving in to Europe for the past almost 30 years. They originally started in the early 1990s by a group of prisoners who were protesting, frankly, the awful conditions of Brazilian prisons. And this organization eventually grew and spread to other prisons throughout the Sao Paulo region and then all throughout Brazil. And they have a strict hierarchy and a set of rules similar to what Cosa Nostra in Italy has. But despite their rhetoric of being a group formed to protect prisoners and to advocate for prisoner rights, they quickly turned to drug trafficking, particularly cocaine, and they linked up with prominent Colombian drug cartels, with groups in Europe, even set up bases in West Africa, which has emerged as a prominent transit point from cocaine heading into Europe. Going back to Gritzbach, the military police officers who are accused of killing him are alleged to be linked with the PCC, and Gritzbach was murdered in Guarulhos International Airport back in November. So far, 26 people have been arrested in his murder, including 17 military police officers, and 2 of those are accused of being the shooters in his murder. And a couple of days before his death, he testified to Sao Paulo military police involvement with the PCC. And prior to becoming a cooperating witness, Gritzbach was arrested for the murder of 2 PCC members who discovered that he was stealing money from them that they had given him to launder. And he also claimed after he became a cooperating witness that he was offered by corrupt police officials a bribe in return for charges being dropped. So I think this goes to show the power of PCC in that they have been able to link up with the Sao Paulo Military Police. They also have a lot of involvement in many different legal sectors in Brazil, such as gas and real estate. There's even allegations that mayoral candidates for Sao Paulo City are in their pockets, but it remains to be seen if these officers who participated in the murder will be held accountable, or if Brazil's notoriously corrupt system will help them escape justice. For our next story, we are going to the island of Jamaica, where a man named Othniel Loban, aka Thickman, the leader of the One Order gang, was shot dead by police in St. Andrew, Jamaica. The One Order gang has a fierce rivalry with another gang called the Klansman One Don Gang over extortion and drug dealing throughout Jamaica. The One Order gang is alleged to have ties to the Jamaican Labour Party, which is one of the two major political parties in Jamaica. And the Klansman One Don gang has ties with the rival People's National Party, which is the other prominent political party in Jamaica. And gangs being involved with political parties is nothing new in Jamaica. This has been going on since the 1960s when Jamaica became an independent country. Political parties have used gangs since the 1960s to terrorize the population into voting for candidates of their party rather than the other rival party. And this has led to the empowerment of gangs since then. And it has also led to Jamaica being one of the homicide capitals of the world. But the killing of Loban this past week has led to violent backlash in Kingston, the capital of Jamaica, and it has caused the government to declare a mass crackdown on gangs, similar to what has happened recently in Trinidad and Tobago. And if you want to go back a little further, what's happening currently in Ecuador with the gangs down there. Our next story is concerning Mexican drug cartels, more specifically the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, one of, if not the most powerful drug cartel in Mexico and the world. Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, also known as La Jefa, who is the wife of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, alias El Mencho, the leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. She has been released from prison. She was put in prison because she was accused of helping the CJNG launder money with a car wash that she owned. She was arrested in Guadalajara, Mexico in November 2021 and was later sentenced to 5 years in prison. A little bit of her background: despite her being married to El Mencho, she comes from a very prominent family of narcos. Her brother is the leader of Los Ciunis, which is a group allied to CJNG. Her family formed the Milenio Cartel, which is the predecessor of CJNG. In 2010, the Milenio Cartel fractured, and El Mencho went off on his own and formed the CJNG. So she's out of prison now. It remains to be seen if she will run back to El Mencho. A lot of people think that El Mencho may be dead. He has apparently been fighting a serious kidney illness in recent years. However, this hasn't been confirmed, and he still remains the most wanted cartel target in all of Mexico. Next, we are going to Australia, which is a place I have not touched on yet. Professional boxer Sam Abdul Rahim was murdered in an underground car park in Melbourne in the company of his girlfriend. In addition to being a professional boxer, he was a former member of the Mongols Motorcycle Club, which is one of the most prominent outlaw motorcycle clubs throughout the world. It has a very prominent structure set up in Australia. And Abdul Rahim was heavily involved in the illicit tobacco trade, which has been a prominent illegal racket that has sprung up in Australia in recent years and has led to much conflict in the Australian underworld with fire bombings and shootings. And Abdul Rahim had bounties on his head for this reason and for many other reasons, which made him very unpopular in the Australian underworld. A little bit of background on Abdul Rahim. Back in 2015, while in a court session, he brawled with a rival kickboxer. And later that year, he crashed his Ferrari while speeding and killed an 88-year-old woman. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison for this. After he got out of the prison for this vehicular manslaughter, he was targeted for murder in a drive-by in 2019. In 2020, he joined the Mongols Motorcycle Club, but he was kicked out after only 6 months. In addition to this, he became unpopular with the Comanchero Motorcycle Club, which is one of, if not the most powerful outlaw motorcycle club in Australia, and they control much of the cocaine and meth trade of Australia, which is worth billions of dollars as Australia has become heavily targeted by Mexican drug cartels for the high price that cocaine sells in Australia compared to other places. So he obviously formed a lot of enemies prior to his murder. And after being kicked out of the Mongols, he was ambushed and shot 8 times outside a cemetery in 2022 while driving in a funeral procession. Obviously, he managed to survive, but he survived with a bullet being lodged in his kidney. In June of 2023, he had his tobacco shop firebombed 3 times. As I mentioned earlier, the illicit tobacco trade has been gaining prominence in Australia in recent years, and he was looking to cash in on the rewards. And just in February of 2024, he had his boxing gym burnt to the ground, and this was ahead of a bout that he was to fight. And then in May of that same year, he survived an assassination attempt in front of his house after being shot at 17 times. This caused him to go into hiding. While he was in hiding, he had his house shot up again, and then one of his relatives' business was firebombed. So it's no surprise that he was murdered. He'd been targeted for murder on numerous occasions before. He had built up hostilities with many members of the underworld, including the Comanchero and Mongol motorcycle clubs. So he's honestly lucky to have survived this long, and I don't think that the members of the Australian underworld are going to miss him. Okay, and our final story for the week concerns a fugitive Dutch drug lord named Jos Liedekkers. Liedekkers was spotted in the West African country of Sierra Leone after a video was recorded at a New Year's Mass by the president of Sierra Leone, Julius Maada Bio's wife, and this video showed him sitting next to the president's daughter. Unconfirmed reports say that they are married or possibly in a relationship, and that Liedekkers has the protection of the Sierra Leonean government. A little bit of background on Liedekkers. As I said before, he's Dutch. He became one of the most prominent cocaine traffickers in the Netherlands. The 2 Dutch ports of Amsterdam and Rotterdam were the 2 main gateways of cocaine into all of Europe, and Liedekkers was one of the top people in the hierarchy of the Dutch underworld. While in the Netherlands, he was responsible for many different murders, including the murder of Naima Jalal, who was considered the queen of cocaine. She disappeared in October 2019. After this, a shipping container was located where it is thought she was to have been brought and tortured before she disappeared. So Liedekkers was obviously a very notorious figure in the Dutch underworld, and he was one of the most powerful figures in the international drug trade in general. He fled to Turkey in 2020. Turkey is a country that allows you to obtain a passport if you pay a significant amount of money to them. And they have become a safe haven for drug lords, gangsters throughout the world in recent years. And Liedekkers based himself in Turkey in 2020 and brought along different members of his organization back in the Netherlands. But in 2023, he fled after he was ordered arrested. He managed to escape, but most, if not all, of his associates in Turkey were arrested, including his right-hand man. The Liedekkers managed to escape, and it was unknown where he was until 6 months ago when the Dutch authorities found out he was in Sierra Leone. But this information was only released to the public this past week when it was revealed that this video was recorded in the company of the president of Sierra Leone. And I don't think it's surprising that he ended up in Sierra Leone because Sierra Leone is in West Africa, and West Africa has become a key transit point for cocaine coming from South America and heading to Europe. Has become a major stop-off point. So I think Liedekkers probably went to Sierra Leone to personally oversee one aspect of his business. But the Dutch authorities obviously are asking the Sierra Leone government to extradite him back to the Netherlands. Back in June of 2024, He was sentenced to 24 years in prison for cocaine trafficking and orchestrating a murder. Obviously, he was convicted without being present. And then back in September of 2024, he was sentenced to another 10 years for cocaine trafficking and assault. The Sierra Leone government claims that they're willing to work with the Dutch government to bring him back, but they are denying that he is in Sierra Leone, despite strong evidence that he is. And it looks like the Sierra Leone government could be compromised, as it looks like Lee Deckers has a very prominent relationship with the president of Sierra Leone and his daughter. That's going to do it for this week of Organized Crime News Weekly. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week with many new fascinating stories emanating from the global underworld. Thank you so much for joining.